Wellington, Halton Hills.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Je vais partager mon temps.
I will be sharing my time with the member for Charlebourg-Haute-Saint-Charles.
Madam Speaker, I'm in support of concurring in the fourth report of the Public Safety and National Security Committee, which expresses its strong support for Finland's and Sweden's accession into the NATO alliance, and which calls on all NATO members to approve their application for NATO membership as soon as possible. Russia's invasion of Ukraine on February 24th was an illegal act of war. It was an unprovoked attack on a European democracy. And it marks the first war between European states since 1945. It shattered the relative peace and security that we in the Western Alliance have enjoyed for the last 8 decades, since the end of the Second World War. Russia's war in Ukraine has actualized something that was once only theoretical. An authoritarian state led by an autocrat directly attacked.
For silence, please. We had silence for the previous speeches. Could I ask that conversations be taken outside, please? Thank you. The Honourable Member for Wellington, Halton Hills.
Russia's war in Ukraine has actualized something that was once only theoretical. An authoritarian state led by an autocrat has attacked a democracy, has demonstrated it is willing and able to attack a democracy. It's made clear that democracies that stand alone and are not part of military alliances are most vulnerable. And that's why it's become necessary to bring both Sweden and Finland into the NATO alliance. And this is an urgent matter. It's urgent because Sweden and Finland are now very vulnerable, because they sit in between a period where they were once neutral states and full NATO membership, which would guarantee their security and protection by other NATO members under Article 5. And that's why this debate is so important, and why I hope the House will add its political support to the Government of Canada's decision to support Finland and Sweden's accession to the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. It's also an urgent matter because now that Sweden and Finland have indicated that they wish to join the NATO alliance, Russian disinformation will no doubt accelerate through media sympathetic to Russian disinformation and through political actors sympathetic to Russian disinformation. And that's why it's important that we here in this House speak clearly and categorically about our support for both Finland and Sweden's entry into the NATO alliance. It's also important that the Government of Canada put pressure on NATO members who are resistant to Finland and Sweden joining the NATO alliance. Both Turkey and Croatia have indicated concerns, if not outright opposition, to Finland and Sweden joining NATO. The Government of Canada must make clear through its ambassadors, as well as discussions between foreign ministers and heads of government, Canada's position. Canada supported Turkey's accession to NATO in 1952, and Canada should now ask Turkey to clearly support Finland and Sweden's accession to NATO in 2022. Canada should note that it supplies military equipment to Turkey, particularly key technology for Baykar drones. Canada supported Croatia's entry to NATO in 2009, and now Canada should ask Croatia's president, Mr. Milanovic, for his support for Finland and Sweden's accession into the NATO alliance in 2022. The government should note that continued opposition could have negative repercussions for Canada-Croatia relations, impacting everything from youth mobility arrangements to the promotion of two-way trade and investment. The Government of Canada also needs to make clear to Finland and Sweden that both Canada and Turkey work together to combat terrorism. And it should indicate that there are groups that both Canada and Turkey consider terrorist entities as listed under the Canadian Criminal Code. And the Canadian government should do as the United Kingdom government recently did and provide security interim security guarantees to both Finland and Sweden in the interim period where they are the most vulnerable before their accession to the NATO alliance, to counter any plans that Moscow may have to try and block and intimidate these two countries. Madam Speaker, I had the pleasure of meeting Ann Linde, Sweden's foreign minister, on May 5th. We discussed Sweden's application to join NATO, Russia's war in Ukraine, and its implications for defense, energy, and Arctic sovereignty. It was clear during our discussion that it was in Canada's interest as well for Finland and Sweden to join the NATO alliance. Their membership would help bolster Arctic defense and security, a region that Russia considers its most strategically important, a region in which Russia has invested considerable resources in recent years. Finland and Sweden also have robust militaries that could bolster Canada's contributions to the military alliance. Finland demonstrated its fighting spirit during the Winter War of 1939 and 1940, where brave Finns fought back advancing Soviet tanks by running up to the tanks with tar-coated bombs and slapping those bombs onto the track treads of those Soviet tanks, disabling them. They used nothing more than their bodies and simple homemade, handmade bombs to stop the Soviet army in its tracks. And they eventually repelled the invaders. And the Swedes have a robust domestic military industry. They produce the Gripen fighter jet. And so it is in Canada's interest that both Sweden and Finland join the alliance, helping us to bolster our military capabilities both here and abroad. Finland and Sweden and their desire to join NATO have demonstrated how much the world has changed since Russia's invasion of Ukraine on February 24th. For some 200 years, Sweden has had a policy of neutrality, longer than the Confederation of Swiss Cantons, longer than Switzerland. In fact, their position of neutrality dates back to 1812, when they lost territory to Russia as a result of the Napoleonic Wars. The fact that after 2 centuries of neutrality, Sweden has formally applied to join a military alliance reveals how much the world has changed in the last 3 months. And that should be a wake-up call for the government. The world has changed, but the government has been slow to react to that change. Russia's invasion of Ukraine makes it urgent that the Canadian government meet its 2% commitment to spend 2% of Canada's gross domestic product on our military. That's something they committed to before the most recent budget, something the most recent budget fails to deliver on. And our allies are increasingly making note of our failure to uphold our defense spending commitments. Just this past week, U.S. Ambassador to Canada David Cohen said, and I quote, "In the public discourse leading up to the release of the budget, the rhetoric from senior Canadian government officials implied that there would be a significant increase in defense spending," end quote. He added, quote, "It's fair to say that although $8 billion is more money, it was a little disappointing as matched against the rhetoric that we heard leading into the release of the budget," end quote. Finland and Sweden understand that the world has changed, and that's why they are urgently seeking to join NATO. Germany understands that the world has changed, which is why Chancellor Olaf Scholz, who heads a center-left coalition, announced on February 27th a dramatic U-turn in decades of German foreign and defense policy by immediately committing to increase German defense spending to well beyond 2% of gross domestic product, with an immediate commitment to spend $140 billion Canadian on German defense spending. Other NATO allies understand that the world has changed, but the government has not and has been slow to react. Madam Speaker, let me finish by stating clearly and categorically that we as Conservatives support Sweden and Finland's accession into the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. And I encourage all members of this House to do the same, to ensure that the Parliament of Canada adds its clear voice of support to the Government of Canada's decision to support Finland and Sweden's accession into the NATO alliance. Thank you, Madam Speaker.